you mentioned it's been a commensurate spike in crime. Spike might be the wrong word.
Yes,
sir. Commensurate growth in crime with our growth. What sort of toll do you see that take on your officers?
I think the toll comes in when we arrest the same person, we put them in jail, and they're either already on probation or parole, and they get out for whatever reason, low bond, no bond, or they go back to, if they're a parolee, for example, they go back to prison, and then they're let out again. And so the toll is arresting the same people over and over. Like, for example, we arrested a gentleman on a DUI last night who was on parole. The soonest he should be eligible, that one of his sentences will be satisfied, is in January of 2029. And he's on parole for 7 different counts, including robbery and aggravated assault, or just a couple of them. So we arrested him for a DUI last night. They did drop an agent's warrant on him, which is nice. But
what does that mean?
So if you're on probation or you're on parole, you're supervised by a probation or parole officer through the Idaho Department of Corrections. And that's a probation or parole agent officer. They have the ability, like last night, this gentleman's behavior was enough that they were able to go into the jail and put a warrant on saying, you're on parole, an agent's warrant puts them on a hold. So even if they could bond out on other charges, if that hold is in place, it's a parole violation. Then they write it for a parole or a probation violation, and then a judge would decide later on if there's going to be a bond or let them out, or if they're just going to go back. The parole commission could say, oh no, your behavior hasn't changed, so we're going to put you back in custody. So they have programs out there to try to rehabilitate people, which is a big part of their goal, their mission.
Right. So that's obviously the goal, is we as a community have decided that we want to be rehabilitative.
Yes.
Where do you see that line between we're trying to rehabilitate you and letting people out too soon, or letting people out that shouldn't be let out?
That's hard because the parole commission has statutory requirements they have to look at. But I think a lot of the time when people are let out on furlough, or they're let out on parole, or even sometimes when a judge at sentencing gives them probation, which that means they don't go to jail, but they're still under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections. Sometimes those decisions are looked at on a vacuum, just based on this incident and not on history. So for example, the walkaway that happened in the southern Idaho, if you take the fact out that he was being looked at for a murder, and you look at his parole, and I think it was on one of your stories where they talked about this is his history, and this is his history in jail, and the jail couldn't handle him, and he's on parole. You should go back to prison. If you're on parole and you get violated, the jail shouldn't be holding these people. They should be in prison. And so the snafu, or however you want to call it, then he gets put in a minimum security where he can walk away. But let's even take out the fact that maybe he didn't have a record, but he's looking at a murder, and he still shouldn't be in a minimum security. So sometimes I think that they're made in a vacuum. The decisions are made in a vacuum, and it's hard to put someone in prison on initial charges unless it's like a murder or a rape or something. The aggravated assaults and things like that, the judges, by law, probation is the preferred sentence, right? Hey, we want to put you in our custody where we can supervise you to see if we can rehabilitate you. So by the time you get to prison, most people, you have this, there's been a history of things, and some of them could be misdemeanors, but it's just the best prediction of future behavior is past behavior most of the time. So we need to look at that when we're making those decisions too. Maybe that needs to have a little bit higher of or a little bit more weighting on the decision for if you're going to be on probation or go to prison. And then when you get to that point where can you get on parole, that the back history might need a little bit more weight to be like, you might be eligible, but let's just give you another year or two to see how it goes.
What other changes would you like to see? You've been vocal about your frustration with arresting the same people.
Yes, sir.
Again and again.
We know, like you said, we've all struggled to staff, and IDOC is the same way with probation and parole corrections officers. But when we have parolees, people who are out of prison or they're on probation and haven't been to prison, I'm going to go back to 2016, Marco Romero. He was in prison. He tested hot in prison, which means they gave him a drug test and he was positive. They let him out. He tested hot. He never saw his probation officer. And then he ended up shooting a couple family members, carjacking a lady, shooting Kevin Holtree, shooting Jardo. So that's probably the more significant one. But we have probationers and parolees that tell us, I've been out for a month, I haven't seen my probation officer. They don't routinely test people for drug tests anymore. If they get tested, they're like, well, they don't do anything to me anyway. So I get they have that rehabilitation aspect of it, and that's important, but there's also that accountability aspect, and it seems like that needs to be strengthened, and I think that might help if people knew, hey, I'm on probation for a drug offense. I can be tested at any time, and then they actually did that, tested people randomly. That would hopefully keep that person from reoffending using drugs, and then we're at that point where they're rehabilitated, hopefully, and they don't ever do drugs again, and they leave the system and it's a success.
What sort of effect does that have on you, on your officers, on the department, when you're out working in dangerous situations? You just gave the perfect example, and then you see the same guy back out on the street again. Really, he shouldn't be back out on the street for another 4 years. In another example of the DUI you gave. What sort of effect does that have on police, on doing your job?
Some of it's probably going to depend on what the interaction was. So if for example, in the last few months we had a parolee who tried to run and rammed one of our police cars, went over a fence, ended up getting bit by a dog. And so if they fight us, it's physical. It doesn't become personal, but then when they get out again, now you're a little bit more leery about that person versus, hey, it's the person that's on probation or parole for a drug offense, theft offense. You arrest them, they're like, yeah, I know, I messed up again. And so the toll of, hey, this person tried to beat me up, they fought me, versus the person who's like, yeah, hey, you got me, I messed up. There's a difference there. And honestly, I think for a lot of the troops that are on the street on a day-to-day basis, they're like, oh, he's out again, no surprise. Or she's out again, no surprise. Like, we're going to arrest them, but they'll bond out, or the judge will let them out, whatever the case is, and we'll just deal with them again. So you just kind of learn to live with it.
Does that start to feel like you're just on this merry-go-round from hell of like...
Yeah, it can be frustrating. It's, you arrest the same person for the same thing over and over. That's frustrating. And
do you feel like there's a common sense or an easy answer that people are just overlooking in that, or is it more complicated?
I think it's extremely complicated because you have the law enforcement view of, hey, we're out here on the street. We see it, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and our level to arrest is this probable cause level, right? Like, we have probable cause that you did X, we can arrest you. Now, when it gets to the prosecution level, they have to look at a case on, can they prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? So that standard is even higher, and there are just so many variables in every case. Witnesses recant, just things that the case was really good for us, but by the time it gets up here, not so much. And then even if you take it to trial, sometimes it depends on the judge that you draw. Some judges are more lenient than others, and then they interpret things differently because they're human, right? And the law is not black and white, it's gray. And then if they do get put on probation or parole, some judges are more tolerant of people when they violate it before they'll increase the penalty. Okay, no, you can't be out on probation. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. Your behavior hasn't changed. We're going to put you in prison or in jail on the misdemeanor side where we can monitor you, supervise you, and hopefully you'll go to these programs to change your behavior and get rehabilitated. And then then there's appeals, and so it's complicated. There's just so many facets to the system, that check and balance, that sometimes what's frustrating to us is just a part of a check and balance that was established in the Constitution. That we're frustrated, but those are the rules that we have to play by.
Now, is there a simple, obviously, as you were just explaining, the whole thing is complicated. Is there a simple change that you would like to see, or anything that you think would make a change, a difference in this process?
So I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and we've all gotten better in how we do things. But in some instances, some of the programs that have been instituted by different groups, where they concentrate more on calling inmates residents, they call parolees clients. That takes away some of that accountability. And we actually have some probationer and parolees that tell us, no, I'm not a client, I'm not a resident, I'm a parolee. And so, but that's a hard balance, because there's people that are going to say they have studies that proves that if we are nicer to them, not that we weren't nice to them in the first place, but softer on them, then they'll rehabilitate. And that is probably true with a certain group, but I think we've gone too far on the rehab side. And we've kind of drifted away from on the accountability side when they're out on probation and parole. And at a certain point, whatever it is, 2 strikes, 3 strikes, whatever you want to call it, hey, look, no, you're not able to rehabilitate without being in custody. We're going to put you back in custody. Or put you in custody for the first time, and again, provide this programming for you to try to rehabilitate you in a structured, supervised environment.
This might be a hard question to answer, so you obviously don't have to answer. Culturally, a lot of institutions swung really far in one direction. I think you're kind of alluding to that with maybe softer on crime. We saw that at a national level across multiple states. There's an idea that in Idaho, like, we're still very Republican, this isn't woke, like, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But do you feel like that mentality or that ideology has still found a way to kind of permeate into institutions here?
Oh, absolutely. Back in the 8 or 10 years ago, they had the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, and that was this woke, hey, we don't want to put people in prison, we want to be softer, nicer, there's this false narrative out there that first-time drug offenders are in prison. That's not true in Idaho. I mean, it may be elsewhere, but now let me qualify that with my first-time drug offense, maybe that I'm convicted of having a trafficking amount of fentanyl. Yeah, I might go to prison, like the mandatory minimum. There's been pushback, and I'm not even going to say it's either party, because you have one side who they want this soft on crime, the George Soros people. You have the other side who they don't want to spend money for prisons. And so they kind of agree on some of these things. They kind of meet in the middle, and that's a fight. We fight that in the legislature every year. There's people that want to do away with our mandatory minimum on drug trafficking, which we just got passed this year with fentanyl. And even though they know that we have people in the past on undercover drug cases where we have drug dealers, cartel people on wires telling people we don't come into Idaho because we'll know we're going to go to prison with the amount of dope we bring in. There's still people that want to do away with that. And so that's where that woke stuff that comes in, like, well, it's just their first time. Well, yeah, but you have how many 200 fentanyl pills? How many people could that potentially kill, accidentally or on purpose? And so, but it is kind of on both parties are kind of that way. Like, not every member of the party, but you have people on each side that, yeah, we don't want to spend any more. We waste too much money on putting people in prison. And so they align, and okay, yeah, well, if we get rid of whatever crime, then that'll be less people, it'll be less money. And so sometimes a safe society, people are going to be in prison, and they're always, well, per capita Idaho's the highest. Well, look how many people are moving. We're also one of the fastest growing states. There's a reason, right? A long time ago, a business person in Garden City said people aren't going to build in Garden City, and Garden City isn't going to grow unless it's safe. And so that's one reason I think that we have the growth in Garden City, is it's from when I started in the mid 90s until now, it's a big change. And so it's like I said, it's tough. Every year in the legislature, there's, we're going to get rid of mandatory minimums. We don't want, and so law enforcement, the prosecutors, the sheriff's chiefs associations, or FOP, push back every year and waste a lot of time pushing back on things that work, when there's probably things that if we actually sat down and concentrated on, maybe there's another solution we could come up with, but no one has time to do that because we're fighting each other.
What is a question I haven't asked?
I don't know. I think it's been pretty. I know, like on these, I do press releases and stuff. That when there's someone that's on parole, and I do put that in there because I am frustrated. When our car gets rammed by someone who should probably be in prison, that we feel, that's frustrating. And so I just think we need to have a conversation, and it needs to be an ongoing conversation, and that should include the sheriffs, the chiefs, the prosecutors, legislature, and IDOC. And that's where some of the disconnect has been over the last few years, is that conversation with the leadership at IDOC. And understanding that I'm 4.2 square miles, right? He's got the whole state. IDOC admin has the whole state, so we understand that. But as long as you're at the table and we can all explain our frustrations, we can always all agree to disagree. But then how do we then move forward to make it better for everyone? We don't want people in prison. We would like everyone not to commit crimes, right? It'd be awesome if we didn't have to have prisons. But we want the community to be safe, whether it's violent crimes, drug crimes, drinking and driving, which I would say is a violent crime. But we need to work together. And we do pretty well, but we need everyone at the table.
Perfect. Was anything you want to add that I missed?
No. But just we all have hard jobs. And when we have snafus, the consequences are very high. The snafu at the hospital. High class, the person that was going to the hospital, pretty risky person, right? And so the snafu is when you transport someone like that, you should probably have more people. So we have to be better. We have to try to do everything we can to eliminate those snafus so people don't get hurt, or in that case, 2 people got murdered. So.